Thank you very much, Anna-Sophie. Your presentation must have been very clear because there weren't any questions that came through in the chat. I'd still like to take a brief moment to give people a chance to put in some questions, and we can address them at the end of today's webinar on this segment. I'm going to tell you more about the CORSIA implementation in the EU. As we know, the Stop the Clock was extended one last time so that EU ETS is applicable to routes intra-EU flights, and CORSIA is applicable to routes outside of, to and from the EU and between third countries. 2023 concluded the pilot phase of CORSIA, and in 2021 and 2022 and in 2023, you reported on your yearly emissions falling under CORSIA. In addition to that, the European Commission is currently working on implementing the additional aspects of CORSIA, specifically the implementation of how you can fulfill your offsetting obligations. And with that, we expect a new legislation, which is yearly, the European Commission publishes the list of countries which are considered to be applying CORSIA, and you need to use that list in order to set the specific routes that are applicable or not for the offsetting requirement. Furthermore, we have a delegated regulation upcoming on how you can fulfill your offsetting obligation with the eligible CORSIA units, should you be required to offset your emissions. As Anna-Sophie just went very much into detail on the monitoring and reporting obligations of sustainable aviation fuels under EU ETS, that does not apply to CORSIA. So the monitoring and reporting rules for sustainable aviation fuels, also known as CORSIA eligible fuels, is currently being drafted by the European Commission, and we will share that with you as soon as we have more information on that. And lastly, the last new task under CORSIA will be that you'll need to report on your cancelled CORSIA emission units. So what does this mean? This means that the NEA has to calculate your offsetting requirement based on the ICAO sector growth factor, which is published yearly. Based on the sector growth factor, which is the comparison of the sector growth compared to the benchmark in 2019, we will calculate your offsetting obligation. And with that, then, if you have an offsetting obligation, you'll need to fulfill that by canceling eligible CORSIA units. And if you're using fuels which are eligible under CORSIA, then you'll need to monitor and report these according to expected delegated regulation, which will also be implemented into the new monitoring and reporting template, which is currently being generated by the European Commission. This is a timeline. I think the first major date in this timeline is the 31st of October. So each year, ICAO determines the sector growth factor based on each state's report of emissions to the CORSIA reporting tool. Last week, it's important to note that ICAO published the sector growth factor for 2023, and again, the sector growth factor was 0. This means that several dates further on in the timeline will not apply to the pilot phase, as there has not been a growth compared to the 2019 benchmark to date. We will notify you of your official CORSIA offsetting obligation for the year 2023, and also your final offsetting obligation for the period 2021 to 2023 by the 30th of November. Following that, we expect two delegated or implementing regulations for CORSIA, firstly being the list of states which you need to use for your 2024 emissions report, for which states are applying CORSIA and thus you would have an offsetting obligation for. And lastly, the reporting of CORSIA eligible fuels and CORSIA emissions and the unit cancellation reports. Going into 2025, theoretically, the 31st of January would have been the deadline for aircraft operators to fulfill their cancellation obligation. This deadline will apply from the conclusion of the first phase of CORSIA in 2026. So there's no offsetting that will need to be fulfilled by the 31st of January in 2025. But we do expect detailed rules on the eligibility criteria, because you will be able to report fuels which are eligible under CORSIA with the 2024 emissions reporting year. At this moment in time, we don't have any details on that, but we will share that with you as they become available. And lastly, together with the EU ETS reporting deadline, you'll submit your CORSIA annual emissions report to the NEA by the 31st of March, which also needs to be verified by an independent verifier. These are relevant links of either published legislation or what is anticipated. If you're interested in following up on these or staying up to date, we've added the links to the Have Your Say web pages from the European Commission, so you can get updates on that directly from the European Commission. Thank you. That concludes this agenda item for CORSIA. I'll take a moment to see if any questions have come in before moving on to the next agenda item. I see if there's a question coming in. The question is, are you saying that the NEA will require EU operators to offset their 2021 to 2023 CORSIA state-to-state emissions, even though CORSIA growth factor for that period was 0 emissions? No, that is incorrect. So the NEA notifies you of your offsetting obligation according to European legislation. There's a delegated regulation which has the calculation which we're required to use, and the calculation is based on using the ICAO sector growth factor, which is published each year. And as last week, the sector growth factor was published by ICAO for 2023, and it was again 0. The expectation is that there will be no offsetting obligation for the CORSIA pilot phase, but we will still share with you an official letter notifying you of your official final offsetting obligation for the pilot phase 2021 to 2023. Thank you for that question. Okay, then I'm going to move on to the next agenda item, which is on a new delegated regulation, RefuelEU Aviation. Specifically, this presentation goes into detail on the obligations for aircraft operators. This is an overview of the steps that you need to fulfill, or the steps that you need to follow in order to fulfill your obligations under RefuelEU for the first 2024 reporting period. First off, it's important to determine whether you are an obligated aircraft operator under RefuelEU. If you are an obligated aircraft operator, then you need to monitor and collect the required data, which you'll need to report this year for the first time. If applicable, you can apply for exemptions prior to reporting. I'll go to detail on which exemptions those are in the following slides. Following that, you need to complete the reporting template, and with the reporting template, you can justify exemptions under Article 5.2. Again, I will go into detail on the further slides on how you would do that. And lastly, you need to have your RefuelEU report verified by an independent verifier and submit it through the EASA sustainability portal. So who is an obligated aircraft operator under RefuelEU? The regulation defines an aircraft operator as a person that has operated at least 500 commercial passenger air transport flights or 52 all-cargo air transport flights departing from union airports in the previous reporting period. The aircraft operator is identified by the call sign. If it's not possible to identify who the aircraft operator is, then it would be the owner of the aircraft. For the purposes of the 2024 reporting year, the European Commission, together with Eurocontrol, generated a list of obligated aircraft operators using 2022 flight data. So if you are on this list, then you have an obligation to report in 2024. However, please keep in mind that if you're not on the list, you still need to check whether you do or do not meet the definition of an aircraft operator, because it could be that you are not on the list and that you do in fact actually have an obligation. So if you are obligated, what are your obligations? The regulation, the main obligation is the refueling obligation defined by Article 5. You're required to refuel at least 90% of the yearly aviation fuel required at each departing Union airport from which commercial air transport flights are operated. Each year, you need to submit an annual verified report by March 31st using the reporting template supplied by EASA, where you report the quantities of fuel, among other aspects that you need to include in your annual report. Lastly, the annual report has an aspect in regards to claiming the use of SAF, and the intention is to ensure no double claims of SAF in different schemes. So we have EU ETS Aviation, there's CORSIA, there's a UK ETS, and any sustainable aviation fuel used and claimed may only be claimed in one of those systems. So the point of this part of the report is to ensure that no double claims have taken place. An aircraft operator which fails to justify non-compliance with the 90% refueling obligation is liable to fines and penalties starting from the 2025 reporting period. So 2024 is basically a dry run. We will not be imposing fines if you have not met the refueling obligation in 2024, but we will be enforcing the reporting obligation. And the NEA is the competent authority for enforcing that aircraft operators under administration of the Netherlands comply with these obligations. So the NEA is the one responsible for instance, penalties if not compliant. I mentioned two exemptions to the Article 5 refueling obligation. The first exemption is a prior justified exemption. This means that you can submit your request prior to the reporting period in the EASA portal. And this only applies in situations where it meets the criteria listed here. So it's limited to specific routes, and it needs to meet the conditions under Article 5.3a and 5.3b. So the first is, does your exemption request meet the distance requirement? It would either be an existing or new route that has less than 850 kilometers departing from a Union airport, or less than 1,200 kilometers when this route connects airports situated on islands without rail or road connection. If that route meets the first two criteria, the distance requirement, then it also needs to meet either 5.3a or 5.3b. You're not able to perform turnaround flights within a reasonable time, or due to structural fuel supply difficulties at that location, it would lead to a competition disadvantage. And if you believe that routes that you fly, that these criteria apply, then you can submit a request through the EASA sustainability portal. Officially, you would request this 3 months before the start date of the application of the exemption. However, as 2024, this wasn't possible earlier. It's only been built into the EASA sustainability tool recently. So if you intend to make use of this exemption request, please submit this as soon as possible. Lastly, there is a bit of confusion on who is the competent authority for assessing these exemption requests. It's not the NEA. It is the competent authority of the Union airport where you would not be able to refuel due to the exemption request. If the exemption request is granted, please note that it's only valid for 1 year, and the route for which an exemption request has been granted, you do not need to include that route in your annual report. This next section goes into detail about the exemptions stated in Article 5.2, and those are exemptions due to fuel safety rules. These are the exemptions which are justified together with your annual report and need to also be verified by an independent verifier, and evidence needs to be submitted for these. So what are these safety rules? It could be, for instance, due to fuel shortages or weather conditions that the pilot decides that you need to have additional fuel for safety reasons. And if additional fuel has been refueled for safety reasons, it can happen that when you arrive at the Union Airport, you have consumed less fuel, so you have more remaining fuel in the tank, resulting in needing to refuel less required fuel for the following uplift. There is a 10% buffer. So if you, for instance, have refueled 92%, then you still fall within the refueling obligation under RefuelEU. If you refuel anything below 90%, then all of these quantities need to be justified. EASA has a very detailed guidance document detailing scenarios in which this can happen and also how to calculate these. So please take a look at the guidance for more information on this. Again, as I mentioned, how you apply for these, you submit in the annual report, you need to calculate the amount of fuel that hasn't been refueled. Then you need to also submit evidence while having your report verified to the verifier, and potentially also the competent authority can request additional details on this. And this is also, again, as I mentioned, reviewed by the competent authority of the Union Airport where you have not refueled. Again, you need to fill in column H of the reporting template, and this is part of what needs to be included in the justification of the fuel. So specifically, you need to calculate the yearly tanked quantities for safety rules, and you need to provide evidence. Again, this is a screenshot with the formula that can be used in order to actually calculate the quantity for safety rules. So please take a look at this in EASA guidance. In addition to the exemption rules, there are also other aspects that need to be included in the reporting template. This is a screenshot of part of the reporting template and the fields that need to be filled in. Since there's no monitoring obligation under refuel, you still need to monitor and store data. So there's been additional guidance provided on what data sources need to be used in order to fill in the columns in the reporting template. With that, there are also some definitions missing in, or definitions which have been further defined by EASA and the European Commission. And that in regards to the flight hours, it refers to the block time. When reporting in mass, you can use the standard value of 0.8 kilograms per liter or the actual fuel density in order to convert fuel volume to fuel mass. And in the column where you report the difference between the yearly aviation fuel required and the actual aviation fuel uplifted, EASA has updated the template to include a formula so that you only include situations where you do not meet the 90%. So anything above the 90% is not included in your report. Anything below does need to be included. As I mentioned, your annual report needs to be verified by an independent verifier. The verification process can be carried out by EU ETS verifiers accredited with the same accreditation under EU ETS. So no separate accreditation is required for RefuelEU. The verifier checks data and supporting documentation issued during the report. I think there's some technical difficulties going on in the... No, we can continue? Okay, great. So the verifiers that are accredited under EU ETS, they're allowed to verify your reports under RefuelEU without the need for an extension. And it's the verifier's responsibility to check supporting documentation on such as if you've applied for an exemption. So what supporting documentation needs to be provided to the verifier? EASA and the European Commission have advised the minimum documentation is your operations flight plan. The operations flight plan can be used to support the claim on the amounts of fuel that you have or have not refueled. Practically speaking, almost all aircraft operators have been added to the EASA sustainability tool during the summer. EASA sends an activation email. If you haven't received this activation email, it maybe got lost in your spam inbox. You can go to the EASA sustainability portal and select the forgot password. If that still doesn't work, then please get in touch with us and we will help you activate your account so that you're able to report for the March 31st reporting deadline. Again, please take a look at the guidance published by the European Commission and by EASA. There are very in detail scenarios and examples on how to monitor and report and also apply for your exemptions. I see that we have a few questions that have come in. The first question is, for the purposes of the 2024 reporting, the definition is based on 2023 flight data, correct? For 2024, it was based on 2022 flight data and not 2023 flight data. Going forward, it will be based on the previous year. So for 2025, it will be based on the 2024 data. But for the first year, in order to be able to publish the list timely enough, the European Commission decided to do it based on 2022 flight data. The next question is, what if an airline is not on the list but did perform flights in 2024 from union airports? So it's not, for the first reporting deadline, for the first 2024 reporting period, it is based on flights in 2022. And flights carried out in 2024 determine whether you have an obligation in 2025. As it's not possible to determine if you're an obligated aircraft operator within the same year. So we always have to look back a year previously, with the exception of 2024, we look back at 2022. Is there a regulatory reference where it states that there are no fines for 2024? The delegated regulation, I'm not sure I don't remember exactly which article, but it does state that there are specific articles which are going to be implemented in a phased approach. So the dry run year, which the European Commission is calling 2024, is for the reporting obligation, and from 2025, the refueling obligation and penalties on the refueling obligation will be in place. If there is a reason for a lower fuel uplift by an operator which can be proved, is this flight still to be included in the report and highlighted in a separate template? Yes. So if this sounds like it would be an exemption due potentially to safety rules, then you would need to fill in column H of the reporting template using the formula provided by the template, and you would need to supply evidence to the verifier, such as your operations flight plan, so the verifier can then determine whether this is justified or not. In addition to that, the competent authority of the union airport where you have not refueled will also assess whether this exemption is justified or not. These do need to be included in your report. The exemptions which don't need to be included in the report are the exemptions which are requested prior to the reporting period, and those are only in cases of exemptions applicable under Article 5.3. I see another question. That would mean that an airline without flights in reporting year 2024, without flights from a union airport, still would have to submit a verified report. No. So for the 2024 reporting period, we look at flights carried out in 2022. And flights carried out in 2024, those need to be taken into account whether there's a reporting obligation in 2025. And in 2025, again, the Commission will update a list of obligated aircraft operators, but you also need to determine whether you meet the definition of an aircraft operator under RefuelEU. I think that rounds up all the questions. If there are any more questions, then we also have a bit of time at the end of all of our presentations. So that concludes this agenda item. And now I'd like to give the floor to my colleague Philip, who's going to give you more information about the practical details of the upcoming reporting period. Thank you very much.